Morning, everybody. Happy hump day. Welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm being joined by the Mirror's business editor, Graham Hiskett. Morning, Graham.
Good morning. Good morning.
And if the news editor for the Daily Mirror is watching, who's just trying to ring me, I'm on air. I'll call you back in a minute. Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening on podcast will just have to count the pennies again. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on today's spring statement by the Chancellor Rachel Reeves and the revelation that all the predicted cuts we will see are going to boost defence spending. More on that in a bit. But first, I want to take us to page 13, where there's an update on the government's promise to spend something else, a total of £13.6 billion on compensating the victims of both the post office and infected blood scandals. Graham, how's that going?
Slowly is the word, isn't it? I mean, frustrating, agonizingly slowly. I mean, it just seems that the victims of this, both scandals actually have just been waiting for infinitum for justice, and then once there's some form of justice, then and compensation is just taking even longer. And I mean, we heard such grand promises that they were going to speed up the compensation process, particularly for on the horizon on the post office scandal. But as you flagged today, I mean, it's just taking incredibly long. But also when there is some form of compensation, often this chap David Farry, who actually was victim of both in one way or another, certainly directly with the post office scandal. He was offered half. Well, actually, he lost about a million in total, and it's he put in a claim for 450,000, but when he offered, I think he says about 120,000. So, where's the logic in that? I thought we were supposed to be resetting this and giving people back some justice and some compensation to move on with their lives. But obviously, some people it's come too late. Some postmasters have died before the compensation.
You have to keep on fighting as well, even at this stage, having had the compensation agreed. So David had 5 post offices, which is why his losses were so great when things went wrong, when the faulty Horizon computer software started saying that money had gone missing when it hadn't. And his father was also involved in the infected blood scandal, and he had to give evidence to the inquiry because his father contracted HIV after a contaminated blood transfusion back in I think it was the 70s. And so he's actually in this awful position of being affected by these 2 massive national scandals, both of which have been really driven and made worse by the fact that officials have lied and covered up and snuck around and tried to stop paying this money for so long. And now finally we're getting in a position where the government has to pay the money, still not coming. So these were issues under the last Tory government, which kicked the can far enough down the road for long enough that it was Labour that had to commit to paying the compensation when they took office, which they did. But according to David, making that promise is very different to receiving the money. So only about £500 million, a quarter of the total, has been paid to postmasters of what they are owed. And we saw earlier in the week, Lee Castleton, one of the postmasters whose story featured in the Mr. Bates TV drama, he's having to take a bat of compensation to the court. He's got to sue for the money he's owed. I dare say is probably where David's going to end up as well. That will just cost them more. The Infected Blood Authority is predicted to have paid out £100 million by the end of this month. That is just 1% of the 11.8 billion total they're supposed to be paying out. Why is this process, Graham, so laborious? The government agrees you're owed this money, but you have to be weighted to invite to apply for it.
Yeah, and when you heard the sort of grand declarations about drawing a line under this, you thought they would be automatic, wouldn't you? Compensation payments. It's anything but. It's that classic thing, isn't it, where there's an announcement about where we're going to do right by victims, in both cases here, and yet once all the rhetoric, once we move on from that rhetoric, actually in reality, those having to put in the claims and then the agonizing slow paperwork process, it's just, you wonder why it doesn't need to take this long, does it? I mean, come on. I mean, there's supposed to be a resetting of this issue, allowing everyone to move on. But yeah, I think that's the problem, is that people have to put in the claim, and they have to jump through so many hoops. And look, even when you've jumped through all the hoops, actually, what comes out the other side is not that it doesn't compensate you for your losses. I mean, that's the reality, isn't it? So it's just another blow to those victims.
It's just not reasonable, is it? One Inch Punch Boss says they'll do anything to not tax those that can afford it. We'll get onto the issue of super taxes later on, I think, and how we pay for some of this stuff. I mean, Labour did commit to paying this compensation. It's not coming through. The infected blood, for example, is being administered by a compensation authority that's had to be set up, which in itself is costing millions of pounds because there are so many millions of people affected, thousands of people affected by this. The process of checking what you're entitled to compared to everybody else seems to just take forever. Steve says they've had the relief of finally getting justice, only to find the nightmare continues. It's disgraceful. And of course, nuclear veterans have got all this yet to come. So we have to see how that pans out too. So we do need to go on, I suppose, to the main story of the day. And at 12:30, Rachel Reeves the first female chancellor this country's ever had, is going to stand up in the House of Commons and say that all the cuts and money she saved in November is not enough and she needs to do it all over again. So we're going to go into the details of what's being cut and why. But first, Graham, why has her position changed? Why is she having to do this?
Right. Okay. Well, look, she inherited, this over 20 billion black hole. In the public finance. That wasn't good for a start from the Tories. Now, what you'll hear a lot today is that the world has changed since the budget, and there was a great deal of uncertainty. Now, why is that? Well, I mean, everyone listening to this will doubtless know the reasons why. Obviously, the ongoing war in Ukraine, but the big issue is that she's going to put forward. Well, the big issue is going to be Trump and the great uncertainties created for the world economy, tariffs, uncertainty about Ukraine, etc. Now, she's going to have to tread a very fine line here, because although she's going to say there's a great deal of uncertainty and has been created, and let's face it, Trump is the newest has done so.
It's the lead weight on the rubber sheet of the global economy, just sucking it.
But of course, the government also doesn't want to be doesn't want to come out and say that deliberately and say, well, things are in a mess now because of Trump and all the uncertainty he's created. Because obviously they're fearing the retaliation and tariffs, or they're trying to cut a trade deal with the US before April the 2nd, and that's a whole different thing, because that's when a whole load of other tariffs kick in. So yeah, certainly Trump is and the uncertainty and the slowdown in the economy, and we're going to hear a lot about that today. But even before that, some people would say, critics would say, it was some of this has been self-inflicted. They would say that in the run-up to the budget, that the government was far too pessimistic about the economy and about the need for cuts, etc. So they would say some of that was self-inflicted. Then they would say that the budget stuff that was announced in the budget has also hampered growth. So things like the national insurance hike for businesses. So there's a whole number of factors, but I think what you're going to hear a lot about is this big slowdown in the economy. We're going to hear that from the Office for Budget Responsibility. It'll be announced in the statement, as you said, around about after 12:30. But we're going to get the nitty gritty of that later. And they're probably going to halve the UK's growth forecast. So from a 2, which was also already pretty feeble, to something around 1% for the whole year. So that's and that matters to you, me, everyone listening to this, because it means that the government it means it has even less coming in taxes. It has less money coming into the coffers, and that matters because we need that money is needed. My goodness, more than ever, to pay for everything that needs to be paid for. Yeah. Hence why we're going to be hearing obviously more about even new cuts, and perhaps we're going to talk about that. But there's even further cuts to come.
One Inch Punch Boss says, "What's her next move? Removing the free school dinners? Nobody's buying these weak excuses. Skimming benefits was the only option, really." So we've got this situation. We've got the international global headwinds that she can't do a damn thing about. She's got to find a way to blame someone else for it without blaming Donald Trump, because that would upset the trade deal. Right. The tariffs deal and everything else they're trying to do with him and actually manage him. So she can't really blame him, but it is totally his fault. The Office of Budget Responsibility is saying you're only half as good as you thought you were, which is already not very good to start with. Therefore, because of your own fiscal rules, in order to, keep everybody happy, you have to get to this level of spending. You've lost some of the headroom that you had last year. And so the axe does kind of have to fall somewhere. It does. There has to be a way of finding the money. But as Wanich was pointing out there, it's sort of going towards the people at the bottom of the heap. Steve says the trouble is that most of these spending cuts and defence boosts take years to become effective. The UK has short-term problems and long-term solutions. Headline seekers don't solve the economy. He's quite right, isn't he? Now, there are some more unpleasant cuts supposedly coming. There's £5 billion of welfare savings expected today. Where do we think that axe is going to fall, Graham?
Well, this interesting thing emerged overnight. So they announced the £5 billion of cuts to welfare, and we know. Well, we're going to get the impact assessment, the nitty gritty, the awful about how many people are going to be affected, and a bit more detail on exactly what in terms of what benefits. But we know it's going to be PIP. We know it's going to be universal credit. But what's emerged overnight is that although they talked about that £5 billion in cuts, actually the OBR is expected to cause her even more headaches by saying that actually, do you know what, that £5 billion, we don't think we don't think you're going to save that much. We think you're going to save more, like maybe 2.6 billion, something like that. Some estimates put it even less than that. Potentially potentially a lot less than the 5 billion that we've all heard about. So that matters also because, well, firstly, it's also the OBR going, actually, do you know what? We're not quite. We don't think you've done your sums right. So that's going to be a bit of a knot to her credibility, or the Treasury's credibility. But more important than that is that. Yes, we're potentially going to hear about even more cuts to welfare today. They're talking about, although we don't know quite what that figure was, the OBR is going to say, but there's been talk about another 500 million of welfare cuts. So we might hear some more about the numbers of people that are going to be affected by that, and perhaps extension of the cuts in terms of whether there'll be benefits which won't now go up in line with inflation but might be frozen. So yeah, there's going to be two big themes coming out today. One is going to be the economy and slowdown, and the predicted slowdown in the economy, and the other is going to be this extension of the welfare cuts.
Right, okay. Now, Spaceman Dave on Blue Sky says she's just got the country to the, quotes, living on Dartmoor for a week with no food, end quotes, part of the military training regime, which we're all going to be in fairly shortly. He may have a point. Now, what do you think, everybody? Do you think that Rachel Reeves has a choice here? She's got to find the money somewhere, hasn't she? Or can she just ignore that? Can she rewrite her fiscal rules like Germany is, for example? Their government is arguing no, that actually makes things more expensive if you do that. Leslie says, will it be people claiming benefits or the companies making profits from assessing them that will be finding their contracts removed? Lovely point, Leslie. Perfectly made. Now, what's that kind of money being spent on, I suppose, is the question. So there's this 5 billion save, might only be 2.6 billion, but she's committed today on the front page of the Mirror to spending 2.2 billion on defence. So she was talking to our colleague, the political editor, Lizzie Buchan, at a factory making Boxer armoured vehicles, obviously as a way of softening the blow a bit to Mirror readers by showing them what the money is going to be spent on instead. But she's being warned about the impact of all this. So in the paper, it's talking about how disabled women are disproportionately affected by benefits abuse by a partner or carer. There are 10,000 Whitehall jobs maybe coming under the axe. And of course, those people, whether you like them or not, they're the ones who keep the system running. You start taking away Whitehall jobs, you find there's no one on the end of the phone to solve your particular problem. And on page 6, there is a series of heartfelt letters from people whose lives will be unmanageable because if they lose those benefits. Now, Graham, can you take us through a bit some of their stories? We're going to hear that impact statement, like you said today. Yeah. It should be all about money and figures and everything else. But these are the human stories. What do these cuts mean to people who don't need military equipment, but do need a bit of a hand up?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'll tell you what, and this is such an important piece that we've done today, and that when we did, when the Green Paper was announced last week, about I think some one of the people I've spoken to quite a few people who are really worried now about losing their PIP payments and universal credit. Is that one person said, well, people just think that there's just people on benefits, they're just sitting around just waiting for the money to arrive and whatever spending it. you are. He said, look, I was you're 1 or 2 paychecks away from being in the same situation. Here, he was living perfectly. He was actually a carer. He was a carer doing 70 hours a week. He unfortunately was struck down with a couple of illnesses and bad luck, etc. Then he found himself on the PIP, and now is scared stiff of losing his PIP payments, because they pay for the carers, actually, ironically, to come in and look after him. Otherwise, he'd be utterly bedridden. And it's only when you speak to individuals like the Mirror has today and describe their stories that you realise the human pain that is being created by the fear. Jo, for instance, Jo from Greater Manchester, who looks after her disabled son, or she says, living in uncertainty is exhausting, and I don't know anyone who would choose this life. We certainly didn't. And I mean, now that really brings it home. Nobody chose this life. Nobody chose to be disabled or on claiming benefits. Would much rather be out working and yet they are stuck in this system. And I was speaking to somebody yesterday. Sorry to go on, Susie, but I was speaking to somebody yesterday who has been trying to get PIP for the last 10 years. She has OCD and PTSD, and so the idea that this is a free for all. Undoubtedly, there's going to be examples where there are claimants who perhaps could be out working or working more. But again, if perhaps there needs to be much greater support in terms of getting those people into work.
Well, it's not just, as I've said lots of times, it's not just about getting people on benefits to work, like it's their fault they're not working. I've got epilepsy. And if I went to go and ask for a job anywhere as an on-the-road reporter, which is all I'm trained to do, and said, by the way, I've got epilepsy, I can't be out too late, I can't get up too early, I need to watch my sleep patterns and my stress, I'm not going to get a goddamn job.
Yeah.
And it's the same with lots of people who've got God knows what kind of conditions. And Steve says she should tax the super rich more. They'll whinge about it, maybe have to sell 1 or 2 of their fleet of cars, but they need to just do it. And I want to read one thing. It's from Jo from Manchester. He's on this piece that she's her son. And one of the things that we do know that Rachel Reeves is going to talk about doing is stopping support for people until they're 22. So you don't get some benefits till you're 22 years old. Now, if you have a child that needs some extra help, that help all stops at the age of 18. So then there is a 4-year period in which they're unemployable, they don't get any help, their parents maybe still have to care for them and can't work, and there's nothing. And Jo is pointing out that's just going to send parents and whole families deeper into poverty. And she says shutting young people out of support until they're 22 feels criminal. I mean, there's the case of it's a single parent dad who's living with his 18-year-old. She's looking for an apprenticeship, and she's basically his carer. He's got terrible spinal injuries. Brian from Surrey, and they need to have, he needs to help to live to a reasonable standard. Otherwise, he just can't get out of bed in the morning, like you say. And this is not something that, just the worry about this is making a lot of the problems an awful lot worse. Now, Steve was saying there, and other people have said the same, she's been urged to tax the wealthy instead. Now, Labour donor Dale Vince has been vocal about a wealth tax on the top few percent of earners, says that will drag in easily enough money to cover all this without having to change benefits. And she was asked yesterday, Rachel Reeves, if she would keep the 2% tax on big tech firms, which is come in, I think, in April.
It should raise about 700-800 million a year is the idea. Yeah.
Is that all? 700-800 million a year. But the Americans aren't very happy about it. And I said that those trade talks that are going on, Trump is saying, could you get rid of that, please? Because Google doesn't like it. And Rachel Reeves, when she was asked about that, didn't rule out the fact that she might soften it or even take the tax away entirely. It's obviously on the table to be negotiated about. How would it affect things if that tax, the tech tax, went up or down? Because we have jobs in tech in this country too. Meta and Google employ people here. But a lot of their income is, registered overseas and shuffled away, isn't it? Does that tax, would it make a difference if you started taxing Facebook, for example?
Well, I mean, there is that's exactly what they were going to do, wasn't it? Is that finally, these companies who for a long time been accused of using clever accounting, let's say, to not be the most profitable businesses in the world. But yeah, so again, talking tough, but actually listen. So the argument is that if we make a concession here and reduce it, or as you say, even ditch it altogether, then we might get a special, we might get a special treatment by Trump when it comes to tariffs. And again, as I say, these are the April 2nd is fast approaching, so we need to be some movement on this very quickly. The government would argue, well, look, if we give up on this sort of 700-800 million of tax, then actually that means that UK companies won't be exposed to the same tariffs. So stuff we sell to the US, it won't cost that much more. So actually, if these UK companies were taxed were hit with these extra tariffs, that means it hits their businesses in terms of jobs and sales and stuff like that, and ultimately, filters through to working people, as it were. So that would be their argument. That would be their justification. But it would look awful, wouldn't it? Absolutely awful. I mean, again, I was talking to a business yesterday, and they were saying, well, how can you be cutting this tax for the US tech giants when actually I own lots of big stores in the UK, and my business rates are going to be going up? I also invest a lot in tech, so why? It's completely unfair. I mean, the wealth tax, I don't know if you're going, the wealth tax is a really, really interesting one. It's been talked about for many years. It's no country has really been able to make it work in terms of a full-on wealth tax, although it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be absolutely investigating. But one option is to have a wealthier tax, so we actually have a higher rate of income tax for over a certain threshold. And I can tell you that people that I speak to in business who are well off, do you know what? They wouldn't be a big backlash, a huge backlash. They understand that
if someone who's got more than 10 million, for example, suddenly pays 60% rather than 40%,
less than 10 million, even whatever. It doesn't have
not going to get up and go. Monaco.
No, exactly. You'll hear a lot of gnashing of teeth and a lot of complaining about it. But hey, look, I could be wrong. But those that I speak, it doesn't seem that if you increase a higher rate of a new higher rate of income tax for over whatever the threshold is, that's certainly not a tax on working people, is it? As whatever that term really means when the Labour wants to use it. But nevertheless, I don't know. It seems worthy of investigating, certainly.
Yeah, I think it's going to be quite awkward to maybe reduce or get rid of a tech tax when you've got those tech bros like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg cozying up to Donald Trump on the other side of the pond. It might make more sense to maybe find a way that they can't shuffle their earnings offshore. The income that they earn in this country is taxed in this country. Leslie says, instead of taxing the wealthy, why not close more of the tax loopholes and go after those who are avoiding or evading paying tax? Very quickly, Graham, I think that's pretty much because it costs money to do that, doesn't it? It costs staff, and they're busy trying to cut the number of staff in the civil service.
That's very true in terms of HRC. The thing about if you're super wealthy, you can also employ super brainy, super clever lawyers and accountants, and they tend to have a very good track record in making sure that you do avoid rather than evade, but that's a whole different thing. But yes, shifting around so means that you reduce your tax bill.
Yeah, and often they're not the people that get employed by the government. They could employ better lawyers and they'd find a way around it. Steve says, if someone gives me 10 million, I'll happily pay 90% tax on it.
Yeah.
90%. I think I might stop at maybe 70.
90, but yeah.
Now, how about one last thing then? So axing those benefits, correct me if I'm wrong, Graham, doesn't that make people sicker for longer with more cost to the NHS, less likely to work, less money to spend, less tax revenue, and the economy contracts? Isn't this ultimately like a completely false economy?
Yeah, so much of this is about prevention, isn't it? I mean, this is why so much money is being rightly channeled to the NHS. I mean, if you can get people, if you can get that treatment that they've been waiting for, operation they've been waiting a year for or longer, obviously. If you can actually get that operation carried out, that person can get back into work. They can firstly not be claiming as much in benefits. They might be still claiming in work benefits, but not disability benefits. Then of course, yes, they'll be paying taxes. They'll be paying employment taxes. So yeah, and that all goes back into that pot. So yes, it's not rocket science, is it? But it's
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If you want to cut benefits, incentivize employers to employ disabled people,
absolutely,
and not just an all school, because it's just so difficult. And employers will say, I've got to make reasonable demands fitting around, it's going to cost me money, I'm going to employ the able-bodied person. But if you incentivize them to say, that person pays, there's lower national insurance contributions,
Absolutely.
there's some kind of help, you're going to, there's a quota. Everyone has to have 2% disabled, or whatever it might be on their workforce. 20%.
Yeah. Lower national insurance has definitely been suggested, as you said. I mean, one argument is that almost pits two people in the office against each other. But I agree. I think it's
everyone is going to say that person's got a problem and they need to be helped into work. Fine, because it's the employer being pitted against judging them, not the person who's actually next working to them. It's just. Anyway, if we all go to war, they'll suddenly need people to work in the factories, won't they? Then I suspect they'll be begging us, biting our arms off. Now, I can remember 2010, we had all these arguments last time and no one listened then. So let's just see how it all pans out. Right. Okay, thanks for that, Graham. Now, we have managed to find some good news in the world for you, everybody, even on a day like today. Here it is. So if all this talk about there not being enough money to go around has got you down, there is some hope. This Friday, the Euro Millions jackpot is going to roll over and hit a predicted £202 million, which means that you, dear viewer, will have a 1 in 139,838,160 chance, 140 million for rounding it up, of achieving more economic growth than the Chancellor can ever dream of. Graham, there's a 1 in 13 chance, I think, of winning anything overall, or there might be the cost of a ticket back. Is this proof that whatever chancellors or anyone else says about how brilliantly they plan and run the country, whether or not we get any richer is usually just down to luck?
Yeah, I think this is probably a lot of people's plan B, isn't it, really, ultimately? Keep on buying the lottery tickets, Yeah, we know the odds on. I wasn't perhaps trying to ignore those odds, but yeah, that could be the way out, couldn't it? And here you are. If you did win your 200 million, I'm sure. Would you pay your super rich tax on it? I'm sure.
I don't think you pay tax, do you, on national?
It's tax free, isn't it? Well,
I think it's tax free because once you make investments, then that's that. But what would you spend the 200 million on? What could we do it on? I mean, how much would Rachel Reeves need it? Plainly, she needs to get a ticket.
Well, see, here we go, Susan. I've been able to somehow make a connection between the National Lottery and today's spending statement, which is that if those out there did suddenly find themselves with 200 million to spare, they could pay the government's interest bill on its huge mountain of debt for, wait for it, a day, or in fact less than a day. But anyway, if you wanted to help out the Chancellor, you could write a check to her, and she could at least be not have to pay interest for actually less than a day. But nevertheless, if I would hey, I'd be here again with you next time. So that
I'm not sure I'd still be here.
You're not sure you would be there if you did.
I'd probably still.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I would still be around. I'm having a moan, I'm sure, about Rachel Reeves and whatever the government's going to be doing. Now, everybody, the Prime Minister's questions is at 12 o'clock this afternoon, and it's followed immediately by the Spring Statement. It's going to be carried here on these channels later on, so make sure you follow the Mirror for that and keep up to date with it. Let's hope that she's managed to find a rabbit in the hat and there's some kind of extra tax on the rich as well to pay for some of this. It looks like she's going to have to find some extra money somewhere, doesn't it? Maybe just buy a ticket. I think that's what I'm going to do. Thank you, Graham, for taking part and stepping in to help us explain all this today. Thank you, everyone, as well, for taking part. Stay safe, everybody. Take care. We'll be back. Yes, we are. We're back on Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Until then, everybody, stay safe. Take care. Tatty bye.